Well, hello class. It's Mr. McKee. For those of you who haven't been in the Google Meet classrooms and maybe have forgotten what I look like. Hi, how you doing? Anyway, today we're going to be talking about watersheds again, and one of the major important parts of a watershed is the river system. It has a lot of different parts, so we're going to start at the beginning, go on to the end. There will be questions, so you might want to pay attention. Okay, so the river system has to have a place to start, and it's going to start at what we refer to as the river source. Now, the river source for the Chesapeake Bay, for most of the rivers there, are going to start in the mountains in the western part of Virginia. Now, these mountains, the water is going to bubble up from underneath, or it's going to that's where the water is going to be pouring down from the rains as it comes over the mountain. It's going to start there. That's why it's called the river source. Now, water is going to come into the river from all kinds of places, but this is where the rivers get their start. The next thing is once that water has started, it's going to form into what we refer to as tributaries. Tributaries are small streams, creeks, even smaller rivers that then flow together as they move downhill toward the main flat area, toward the river that we're going to be talking about. Now, tributaries sometimes are named and sometimes they aren't. If they're really small and they're just like something going through somebody's land or down through the woods, it may not have a name. But tributaries are a major part of our water system. Now, those tributaries, whether they are creeks, streams, smaller rivers, are then going to flow into the main river. This will be a named river like the James or the York or the Rappahannock or the Potomac. These main rivers are then going to be flowing, and all of these tributaries and the water is flowing down to this main river that is going to carry it on out to, in our case, the Chesapeake Bay. Now, on either side of a river, you're going to have some areas of flat land. Now, these areas will flood on a regular basis. When we get too much rain or there's lots of snow melt, the water will overflow its banks and it's going to flood. And those flat areas are referred to as a floodplain. Now, it's not necessarily a bad thing. You can prepare for these things. You can be ready for it. It's not a bad thing for it to be a floodplain. In fact, it can be very good, especially for farmers, because all of the good soil that is flowing down from the mountains being picked up along the river will then get deposited on those flat lands, making it very, very good for farming. Now, as that river is flowing downhill from the mountains across the Piedmont, it's going to start to get to this flat coastal plain area that you remember about. And when it does, the river is no longer going to cut through the land and make its own path. It's going to start to go around things. It's going to slowly move back and forth in what we refer to as a meander. Now, the meanders are going to make their way around hills and large obstacles. They're no longer going to try to push things out of their way. The river is moving much slower now. It doesn't have nearly as much force as it did when it was up higher in the mountains. Now, as the river gets closer to the Chesapeake Bay, in our example, you're going to get these areas where water sits on top or very close to the top of the land all year round, if all year round or nearly all year round. These are referred to as wetlands. Now, these wetlands have a very specific function. Their job is to start to filter out a lot of the stuff that flows down so it doesn't empty into the bay or to the ocean or a lake or wherever it is that river is flowing to. So these wetlands are very important to the ecosystem that we are involved with. And three of the basic types of wetlands, and there are several. One is called a marsh. This is pretty common around here. We have a lot of marshland. You look on the sides of the roads, a lot of the areas as you're driving around Chesapeake, you will find marshland. You'll see all the grasses and the birds and everything that like to make their homes there. These marshes are very, very common around here. We also have one of the largest swamps on the East Coast right here in Chesapeake, the Great Dismal Swamp. Starting in Chesapeake, going down through northern North Carolina, the Great Dismal Swamp is one of those, and the swamp is a very big wetland, especially the one that we have here. Another type is called a bog. Now, this has got a lot of dead and decaying material in it called peat. And it's good for farming certain things, but not a whole lot. We don't have too many bogs in the Chesapeake area, but they do exist. Now, as we talked about the river having its start up in the river source, it also is going to have some place where it ends. And it's ending down here where the river is emptying into a larger body of water. In our case, the Chesapeake Bay. This is referred to as the river mouth. Now, the river mouth is where the river ends. So it's starting up in the source, flowing down through the watershed, and then exiting into, in our case, the Chesapeake Bay at the river mouth. Now, as it does make its way, some of the larger pieces of sediment are going to fall along the way, but the smaller stuff, the real fine silt, the real fine dirt, now the river is moving so slowly that it can no longer push it along. So it's all going to stop and rest right there at the river mouth in an area we call a delta. Now, deltas are very important. They're land that can be farmed if you're very careful about how you do it. It's a triangular shape, basically, like the Greek letter delta, which is one of the reasons why it has its name. And then you've got all of this fresh water flowing down from the mountains, and you've got the salt water from the Atlantic Ocean moving up into the bay, and they mix. And they mix that area where they do, the salt water and the freshwater mix. This is referred to as an estuary. Now, the estuary is not freshwater and it's not salt water. It's another word. They call it brackish water. It's where the salt and the freshwater mix and meet. This water is very good for a large number of species of fish and birds and crabs and clams and oysters and all kinds of things that we enjoy out of the bay. All of those biotic factors, like the bird here or the cow up here. I don't know if you can see the cow, he's kind of small. So all of those things, the grasses, biotic factor. All of this, these marsh grasses, also biotic factors. The water, the mountains, the air, these are abiotic factors. Remember, biotic means it is alive or once was alive. Abiotic means it is not alive and never was. Now, there's only one more thing that we need to bring in here, and that is a word called divide. Don't worry, it has nothing to do with math. You're not going to have to worry about that for this. But a divide is that place where the water flows in one river into one river basin or into another. If you think about it, if you have a double sink in your house, in your kitchen, and you've got that little strip in between, if you put the water faucet right on top of that, some of the water is going to flow into the one sink, some of it's going to flow into the other. That's the divide. When it rains, some of the water will flow into the one river system, some of it will flow into the other. And that's what we refer to as a divide. It's the area of raised land between two different river systems. Okay, well, this is Mr. McKee coming to you from my back porch, and look forward to seeing the responses to my questions. And then I'll have questions for you too. Bye-bye.